Welcome back, loves, to another glass pouring, heart spilling episode of Hearts Wine from Heart's Distractions. You already know we dive deep into the messiness, the beauty, and sometimes the why am I even here moments of love and relationships. Whether you're in the fresh, can't keep your hands off each other phase, or you've been together long enough to start arguing about who left the laundry in the washer, this is your space today. And today, we're going there. We're talking about your sex life, people. Not the Instagrammable movie screen version. Not the kind of sex you've been taught to want. I mean the real truth about your sex life. Is it what you actually want? Or is it just what you think you're supposed to want? So, y'all already know. I want y'all to go ahead, get that glass, pour that wine, or your favorite mocktail, and let's get into it, shall we? Because I am your host, Alicia Minor Gaines. Yes, of course, a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a relationship coach, an author, an entrepreneur, a mother, so many other things, right? But of course, I like to add in there that I'm a mixologist, right? Why? Because my podcast wouldn't be what it is without that wine, right? And those drinks. All right. Well, we're about to get into it. Because here's the thing. So many of us are playing out a bedroom script that we never even wrote. We picked it up somewhere from TV, from friends, from those awkward middle school sex ed classes, for those of us who had the privilege to actually have those, from our parents' unspoken rules, from magazines that made it seem like all men want the same thing and all women should act like they love it. And it's not just heterosexual couples. My LGBTQ plus couples get these messages too. This is how it should look. This is how often you should do it. This is what counts as good sex. But who decided that? And why do we just accept it? Well, according to American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, about 40% of couples report mismatched sexual expectations as a significant source of conflict in their relationship. That's not just frequency, it's style, type, timing, and emotional connection around intimacy. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Not the safe answer, not the I don't want my partner to feel bad answer. Are you having the sex you want or the sex you think your partner expects? Let that sink in. For some of you, that just hit a nerve. I know because I've worked with couples who had been together 10, 15, even 20 years, and it wasn't until therapy that one of them finally said, I don't actually like what we've been doing this whole time. I just thought that's what you wanted. So y'all know I'm going to give y'all one of my couple stories, but definitely not the names. But we're going to call this couple Tina and Marcus. Their story is real. Maybe a little too real. They had been married for 12 years. From the outside, they had it all together. But in my office, Tina finally admitted she'd been going along with the same routine. You know, missionary, lights off, quick. Because she thought Marcus liked it that way. Marcus, on the other hand, had been holding back things he wanted to try because he assumed Tina was too conservative for it. They'd been quietly disappointing each other for over a decade, not because they didn't care, but because they never actually had the what do you want conversation. That's the bedroom myth right there. I promise you it is. That there's some default version of sex you both should be happy with. But the truth is, sex is not one size fits all. And if you've been playing a role instead of being yourself in the bedroom, that's not intimacy, that's acting. And speaking of acting, a lot of those roles we play, they didn't start in adulthood. they've been shaped by our families, our cultures, and our generation. So we're going to pull back the covers on where your bedroom beliefs really came from. Stick with me on this one because let's be honest. Most of what we believe about sex didn't just magically appear in our adult brains one day. We didn't wake up at 25 thinking, missionary twice a week seems good for me, or I must always be ready to go if my partner wants it. Nah, those ideas have roots, and oh baby, those roots run deep, I promise you. When I ask couples where they learned about sex, I usually get one of three answers. One, from my friends. In translation, that means playground gossip and locker room legends. Two, from the internet or magazines. Translation for that is Photoshop, clickbait headlines, and unrealistic expectations. And three, from my family or religion. I know I'm going there because the translation of that is either don't talk about it or don't you dare think about it until you're married. Now, let's break that down because these influences don't just disappear when you hit adulthood. If you grew up in a house where sex was never discussed, you might still feel awkward initiating conversations about your desires. If your culture celebrated masculinity in a way that meant real men always want sex, you might feel pressure to be always on, even when you're exhausted. If you grew up hearing that women should keep their man satisfied to keep him from straying, you might feel like sex is an obligation, not a choice. So, studies in the Journal of Sex Research shows that early sexual socialization, the beliefs we absorb in childhood and adolescence, has a lasting effect on adult sexual satisfaction and communication patterns. Translation: the way you learned about sex at 15 is still influencing your bedroom at 35, whether you realize it or not. And just so we're clear, it's not just culture or religion, it's generational too. Let's play a little generations and sex game real quick, shall we? Baby boomers, raised in a more conservative era where talking about sex was, gasp, almost taboo. Many still carry that don't discuss it openly mindset. My Gen X started getting more open discussions about sex in school, but still dealt with stigma, especially around female pleasure or anything outside heteronormativity. Millennials grew up with the internet, learned a lot from media, but also exposed to unrealistic porn standards early. And my Gen Zs, the most open about sexual identity, boundaries, and exploration, but still dealing with body image pressures from social media. We speaking the truth today, people. And here's the twist. Even the most progressive sex-positive couples can find themselves following an old script without realizing it. I once had a couple in my office, two women together for 8 years. They came in thinking their issue was just not enough spark lately. But when we dug deeper, they realized they had been unconsciously mirroring straight couple sex dynamics because that's what they saw growing up. Even though it didn't fit them, they felt like they had to follow that pattern to be doing it right. So here's my question for you. And maybe jot this down if you're listening somewhere private. What's one belief about sex you grew up with that you're starting to think might not be true? Because I'm about to start talking about what happens when those beliefs push us into performing instead of connecting, and why faking it isn't just an orgasm issue, it's a relationship issue. Y'all following me? All right, because it's time for a confession session. Yes, I said confession session. How many of y'all had faked it before? And I'm not just talking orgasms. I mean faking excitement, faking enthusiasm, faking like the way your partner was touching you was, oh my God, amazing, when really you were thinking about what's in the fridge. Yeah, I see you nodding. I see those hands up. I feel you. Here's the thing though. This performance pressure we feel in the bedroom, it's sneaky. It doesn't always come from our partner. Sometimes it comes from our own heads. It's that little voice saying, if I don't look sexy enough, they won't want me. If I don't make enough noise, they'll think I'm bored. And if I don't get there fast enough, they'll feel bad. And suddenly, you're putting on a whole Broadway show instead of actually being in the moment. Well, according to a 2023 study in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, 67% of women and 28% of men admit to faking orgasm at least once. But here's what's even more interesting. The study also found that people often fake it to protect their partner's feelings, not necessarily to end the encounter, which sounds sweet, but it's actually dangerous for the relationship in the long run. Because here's the truth. Every time you fake it, you're training your partner to repeat something that doesn't actually work for you. You're basically giving them a gold star for the wrong homework. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and let that one sink in. But while I do that and allow y'all to let that sink in, I'm going to share a couple stories with you. We're gonna call them Alex and Priya. So Alex and Priya, they've been dating for 3 years and were living together. On paper, perfect couple. But Priya admitted in therapy that she had been performing during intimacy. Making sounds, moving in ways she thought Alex wanted, because she was terrified he'd take it personally if she said she needed something different. Alex's jaw dropped, y'all. I promise he did. He thought Priya was the most confident lover he'd ever had, and suddenly realized he had no idea what actually made her feel good. That moment was a turning point for both of them. They stopped performing and started exploring. And yes, of course, their sex life got a lot better. And listen, this isn't about shaming anyone. We've all been there. You're tired, you've got a headache, you've been watching Netflix too long, and now it's midnight, and you think, let's just get this done. But when that becomes the norm instead of the exception, you start losing that spark. Performance pressure is exhausting because it turns sex into a job. And baby, you already have a job. And if you don't, you need to get one. You don't need a part-time acting gig on top of it. Trust me. So, how do we get out of that cycle? Well, first we have to look at the script we've been following. The one that says this is what sex is supposed to look like. We're going to tear up that script and talk about why doing the same thing over and over might feel safe, but it's also killing your passion. So I want y'all to grab that pen and paper, or take a mental note, or put it in your phone, because we are officially about to tear up this bedroom script. The invisible playbook most couples follow without even realizing it. Kiss, touch here, touch there, maybe a little oral penetration, orgasm, hopefully, and boom, roll over, check your phone, go to sleep. Does this sound familiar to any of you? I'm gonna let that sit there for a second. Because here's the thing. That script isn't yours. It's recycled. It's borrowed. It's been handed down through movies, porn, magazine articles, and I heard from my friends' stories. And if you're not careful, you'll follow it for years without asking the most important question, which is, does this even feel good for me? I mean, imagine if you went to the same restaurant every week, ordered the same dish, never looked at the menu, and told yourself, this is fine. Eventually, you'd start craving something different. Maybe spicier, maybe sweeter, maybe something you didn't even know existed. Okay. Well, according to Kinsey Institute, couples who intentionally introduce new elements into their sex lives, whether that's different timing, locations, positions, or types of touch, report a 32% increase in overall relationship satisfaction compared to couples who stick to routine. I don't know how many of y'all heard that, but I said 32% increase in overall relationship satisfaction when you add new elements to your sex life. Don't shoot the messenger. And, this isn't just what you do, it's about how you think about sex. Scripts are limiting. They say this is how it's done instead of what do we actually want right now. Think about it. Let's work with a gay couple. We're going to call them Mateo and Jordan, who came in feeling like their sex life was missing something. When we dug deeper, they realized they had been unconsciously mirroring heteronormative sex roles because that's all they'd been shown growing up. One partner initiates and the other receives in scene. Once they gave themselves permission to completely throw that out the window, they found a rhythm that felt way more connected and satisfying. Now, don't that sound better? Throwing out that script, finding your own way? I think so. So, for my couples and those newly dating in long-term relationships, here's your challenge for the week. Write down your top 5 most exciting intimate moments in your life. Then ask yourself, do these look anything like my usual sex life right now? If not, you have your first clue that it's time to rewrite the script. And here's the best part. When you rewrite the script together, the bedroom becomes less about getting it right and more about enjoying the ride. Y'all heard me. I said enjoying the ride. But of course, before you can rewrite the script, you have to know what's actually in your heart, what you really want, not just what sounds acceptable. So, we're going to talk about self-discovery, fantasy, and how to figure out what genuinely lights you up, even if you've never said it out loud before. So, my couples, can we get a little personal here? We've torn up the script. We've called out the fakers. We've unpacked the cultural baggage. And now it's time for the big question. What do you actually want? And I don't mean the safe answer you'd give in mixed company. I mean the deep down, no filter, if nobody would judge you truth. Because here's the hard reality. A lot of people don't know the answer to that. Not because they're boring, not because they're not sexual, not because they've never given themselves permission to think about it without someone else's voice in their head. It's because maybe they just don't have the answer. So let's start here. When was the first time you thought about what turns you on without immediately worrying if your partner would think it was weird? Or without comparing yourself to some ideal you saw online or in a movie? Sex therapist and researcher Dr. Gina Ogden once said, "We inherit sexual blueprints from our culture, religion, and family. But the deepest intimacy comes from writing our own." That blueprint only changes when you actively ask yourself, what do I like? What do I want more of? And what do I want less of? And here's the thing. Self-discovery isn't just about kinky versus vanilla or spicy versus sweet. Sometimes it's about the setting, the energy, the buildup. You might realize you love morning sex when the world is still quiet, or that you're most turned on by emotional vulnerability. That long, deep eye contact before anything physical happens moment. Okay, one of my past patients, we're going to call her Rachel, told me she always thought she had a low sex drive because she wasn't into quickies or spontaneous encounters. But once she discovered that she needed a slow central buildup with touch, conversation, and no rush, she realized she didn't have a low drive at all. She just had a different arousal style than her past partners. Let that sink in. How many of y'all know your arousal styles? All right. Well, if you're ready to start figuring this out for yourself, here's a little homework. Take a quiet moment alone. Write down 5 things, they can be physical acts, emotional experiences, or settings that make you feel truly excited and alive. Then write 3 things that kill the mood for you. This isn't for judgment, it's for clarity. And yes, you might surprise yourself. Maybe you thought you were into one thing because everyone is, and you realize, not for me. Or maybe you discover you are into something you never admitted out loud before. But knowing what you want is only half the battle. The real test is telling your partner. So, we're going to talk about how to have these conversations without it turning into a fight, a shutdown, or a wait, you want what? Moment. Okay, so here's the deal. Knowing what you want is sexy. Telling your partner what you want, well, that's brave. Because let's be real. A lot of us have been taught that asking for something different in bed is basically saying what you've been doing isn't enough. And that's not true. But it feels true, doesn't it? I've seen couples who can talk about money, in-laws, and where they want to retire. But ask them to talk about what they like in bed, and suddenly, it's like I've asked them to give a speech in front of their high school gym teacher. Some of y'all would rather text your partner, "We need milk," than say, "I want you to touch me here," out loud. Why is it hard to talk about sex? Well, I'll tell you. Out of fear of hurting your partner's fear of being judged or shamed, worrying your desire is too much or too weird, and not having the right words to express what you want, need, let alone like, or even what you want to explore. The Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy has found that couples who engage in open, non-judgmental sexual communication report higher levels of relationship satisfaction, emotional closeness, and sexual fulfillment, regardless of how often they actually have sex. So yeah, this conversation matters a lot, right, couples? Right? My singles out there who are dating? Okay. Here's how to approach it without killing the mood or putting your partner on the defense, though. We're going to break this down in steps for you. So, step 1, choose your moment wisely. You know that old saying, there's always a place and a time for everything, right? So, do not, I repeat, do not bring it up mid-sex unless it's playful and positive. This conversation is better when you're both relaxed, maybe after a date night or during a quiet weekend morning. Step 2, you want to start with some appreciation. It softens the blow. Things like saying, "I love when you," or "I really enjoy when we," goes a lot further than "you never," or "I wish you'd stop." I'm going to let that sink in. Language matters. Appreciation goes a long way. Step 3, use curiosity instead of criticism. Try, "Have you ever thought about trying?" Or say, "What do you think about?" instead of, "Why don't you?" See, that statement didn't work. Those other ones sound a lot better, right? More inviting, more curiosity versus putting someone down. Okay. And step 4, share the why. When you explain why something excites you, it feels less like a random request and more like an intimate window into your desires. Can I give y'all like a role play example here, good versus bad, just so we can bring this home so y'all can understand what I'm saying? So a bad comment would sound like, "You never go down on me." I know some of y'all rolled your eyes at me just now. I know y'all did. But I'm going to give you a better loving version. a good version of this that sounds like, I love when you kiss me slowly before we get started. It makes me feel wanted all over. I'd like more of that. Didn't that sound inviting? I'm just saying, words matter. So I had this couple. We're going to call them Aaron and Simone, who pretty much avoided these types of conversations for years. Simone thought Aaron didn't care about her pleasure because he never initiated certain things. But in reality, Aaron assumed she didn't like them because she never asked. One conversation over a bottle of wine changed their entire dynamic. Aaron literally said, I've been waiting for you to tell me this for a decade. Look how much time they wasted, right? And let me just say this for my overthinkers. Your partner probably wants to please you. They can't do that if they're guessing. This is not a guessing game, and definitely not time to make assumptions. This is a collaboration, people. And speaking of collaboration, I'm going to share some real stories from some more couples. Yes, some straight, some queer, some young, some older, who stopped guessing, started talking, and completely changed their sex lives. And of course, guess with whose help. And yes, some of these are juicy. Okay, so we've been talking about theory, psychology, and some gentle nudges to self-reflect. But let's get real. Sometimes the most powerful way to see what's possible is to hear how other couples have done it. These stories, they're about courage, about saying, we're going to try something different. And spoiler alert, every single one of these couples told me they wished they'd done it sooner. My first story, I like to give some titles to some of my stories. And we're going to call story number 1, the couple who ditched the nice girl act. Yep, this couple we're going to call Brianna and Chris. So Brianna and Chris have been married 8 years with 2 kids, definitely had busy lives. Brianna told me during her first session, I've always just gone along with things in the bedroom. I didn't want to seem demanding. She admitted she often felt disconnected, physically present, but mentally somewhere else. And one night, instead of going through the motions, she stopped Chris and said, I want to show you what I like. But she was terrified he'd feel offended. But instead, his eyes lit up. He later told me in session, I didn't realize I'd been missing her, the real her. Now they have what Brianna calls no script nights. Twice a month, where the only rule is nothing has to happen the same way twice. I'm going to let that one sink in. Story 2. We're going to call this story the couple who changed the time, not the technique. Follow me, y'all. This one's simple but brilliant. And we're going to call this couple Dev and Michelle. Together, 12 years with no kids, thought they had a compatibility issue in the bedroom. But it turned out they had a timing issue. Michelle's energy peaked at night. Dev's, peaked in the morning. They'd been meeting in the middle when both were tired. After one session, they tried swapping date nights for date mornings on the weekends. So 2 weeks later, Michael sent me a text, y'all. Y'all want to know what the text said? Well, the text read, we just discovered Sunday morning sex is basically church for us now. Y'all should have saw my face when I got that text. I said, oh, well, y'all go ahead then. But make sure y'all praise the good Lord later. All right, story number 3. We're going to call this story the couple who let go of normal. Yeah, I put normal in quotes, y'all. We're going to call this couple Alana and Jess, who's a queer couple in their 30s. Felt like they were losing passion, but they realized they'd been measuring their sex life against heteronormative standards, penetration focused, orgasm focused, and goal oriented. Once they gave themselves permission to focus entirely on sensation, touch, and connection, no end goal required, they both said it felt like they found each other all over again. I share these stories because I want you to see that the biggest shifts often come from the smallest changes. Like saying something out loud, changing when you connect, dropping the idea that there's only one right way to be intimate. So, before we move on though, y'all know I have to give y'all a quick red flag checklist, right? The signs that your sex life might be in trouble if nothing changes. This is how you'll know. You never talk about what you want. You regularly avoid sex to avoid uncomfortable conversations or uncomfortable positions. Yes, I said it. One or both of you feels resentful about intimacy, and that could be for many reasons. Whether you're not being intimate at all or it's inconsistent. And you feel more like roommates than lovers. If you're nodding to more than two of these, then I'm going to tell y'all, it's time for a deeper conversation with your partner. And maybe even a therapist and or relationship coach. And sometimes the block isn't about desire at all. It's about what's in the way. Shame, old wounds, even trauma that keeps us from fully showing up in the bedroom. So yes, we're going to unpack that with some compassion and no judgment, because you can't build the sex life you want if you're still chained to old emotional baggage. Okay, loves, this part isn't as light and cheeky as some of the earlier segments, but it's just as important, I promise you. Because for some of you, it's not that you don't know what you want, it's that there's something blocking you from even letting yourself want it. And for many people, that block is shame, trauma, or emotional baggage. Shame can come from anywhere, I promise you. Maybe it was religious messages that told you sex was dirty or wrong outside of certain boundaries. Maybe it was your family's "we don't talk about that" silence that left you feeling like your desires are something to hide. Or maybe it's body shame. This belief that you have to look a certain way to be sexy enough to deserve pleasure. And then there's trauma. For some of you, you've experienced sexual abuse, coercion, or betrayal in the past. Those wounds don't magically disappear because you're in a loving relationship now. You can love your partner deeply and still feel triggered by certain touches, positions, or even the idea of intimacy. The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy emphasizes that sexual trauma can rewire the brain's connection between arousal and safety, meaning until healing work is done, the body may interpret intimacy as a threat instead of a pleasure. Emotional baggage can be less obvious but just as powerful. Maybe you've had past relationships where your needs weren't valued, and now you've learned not to speak up. Maybe you've experienced infidelity and are struggling to be vulnerable again. Can I share a couple stories with y'all? One couple I worked with, we're going to call them Nadia and Leon, who came in because their intimacy had been flat for years. It turned out that years earlier, Leon had made an offhand comment about Nadia's body, something he didn't even remember saying, but it stuck. Every time they were intimate, she'd hear those words in her head, shutting her down. Once they addressed it in therapy, Leon broke down in tears, apologizing that one conversation didn't erase the hurt overnight, but it started the healing process. And with time, once they transitioned into relationship coaching and a little guidance, a little one-on-one in the moment coaching, their sex life transformed. If this resonates with you, hear me on this. Your feelings are valid. Your experiences are valid. And healing is possible. but it's okay to get help. For some, that means working with a sex positive therapist or relationship coach, a trauma specialist, or joining a support group. For others, it's about slowly, gently, and consensually exploring intimacy with patients, because this is very heavy and touches on, yes, trauma. I want to give some resources here for my listeners. RAINN, RAINN, National Sexual Assault Hotline. That number, 1-800-656-4673. ASEC, American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. There's a directory to find sex-positive professionals there. And of course, Planned Parenthood, where you can find your educational resources on sexual health without judgment. Because I want y'all to know, because of your experiences, you are not broken. And you do not have to rush your healing to fit into someone else's timeline or expectations, even when it comes to sex. But once you've faced what's in the way, or at least acknowledged it, you can start building something new. So we're going to talk about creating your own playbook for sexual freedom in your relationship. One that's built on curiosity, connection, and mutual excitement. Okay, so y'all know we've broken the myths, ripped up the script, dug through the baggage. Now let's talk about building something new, shall we? This is your playbook for sexual freedom in your relationship moving forward. And no, I'm not talking about a checklist of kinky things to try before you die, unless that's your thing. This is about designing intimacy that's so authentic to you and your partner that no one else's opinions even matter. So step 1, make a yes, maybe, or no list. This is one of my favorite tools for my couples, and here's how it works. Your yes consists of things you're excited about or already love. Your maybe lists things you're curious about but haven't tried, or you're open to under certain conditions. And your no is your hard boundaries, things that are off limits for you. So sit down with your partner, make your lists separately, then share them together and rebuild it together. What's amazing about this exercise is that it opens the door for exploration and makes your boundaries crystal clear. Step 2, keep curiosity alive. Curiosity is the lifeblood of passion. That doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel every week. It means you keep asking, what would feel good for you right now? Because newsflash, what turned your partner on 6 months ago might not be what they're craving today. I'm going to let that sink in. Step 3, build desire outside the bedroom. Desire isn't just about what happens under the sheets. It's built in those micro moments, the flirty text during the day, the lingering kiss before you part, the inside joke that makes you both laugh until you cry. According to the Gottman Institute, couples who regularly express affection outside of sex are significantly more likely to maintain an active and satisfying sex life over decades. I'm gonna let that sink in. Step 4, have intimacy dates. Here's where I shake things up for couples. Not every intimacy date needs to be about sex. Sometimes it's about central connection. Cooking together, dancing in the living room, giving each other massages. That way, intimacy becomes something you look forward to, not something you pressure yourselves into. Can I give y'all a quick couple story before I give y'all step 5? We're going to call them Jared and Elise. So Jared and Elise were stuck in a rut. Sex felt like a chore, basically. So they agreed to have one intimacy date a week. The first week was a picnic in the living room with music. The second week, they tried to shower together with no agenda. By week 4, they were having some of the most playful, passionate sex they'd ever had. And it wasn't because they tried something wild. It was because they stopped treating intimacy like an obligation and started treating it like a choice. Okay, now I'm going to give y'all step 5. Celebrate wins, not just orgasms. I know some of y'all gasped just now. But sometimes the biggest win is just having a conversation you've avoided for years, or trying something new and laughing your way through it because it was awkward, but it was yours. This playbook isn't one size fits all. It's meant to evolve with you, your relationship, and your desires. Because the truth is, sexual freedom isn't about doing everything. It's about doing what's right for you and loving it unapologetically. And that brings us to our final pour of the night, our closing thoughts. So, yes, we're going to wrap this up with a challenge, a call to action, and a reminder that the sex life you really want is absolutely within reach. Right? Right. I know we've covered a lot tonight. We've talked about the bedroom myths we've all been sold, the cultural baggage we carry, the pressure to perform, and the ways we fake it instead of face it. We ripped up the old script, explored what we really want, practiced how to talk about it, listened to stories from real couples who've made it work, unpacked shame and trauma, and built a whole new playbook for sexual freedom. And now it's your turn. This week, I'm challenging you to do one thing, not 10, not 20, just one thing that moves you closer to the sex life you actually want, which could be write down your yes, maybe, and no list, asking your partner a curious question about what excites them, saying one thing you do want instead of what you don't, or even just taking a quiet moment to ask yourself, what do I truly desire, without censoring the answer. Because here's the truth. Your sex life doesn't have to look like anybody else's. Not your best friends, not your favorite couple on TikTok, not your parents' marriage. It only has to work for you and your partner. So because y'all know I like poetry, I'm going to give y'all a couple lines. I shed the clothes of expectation and stood bare in the light of my wanting. And there you were, not as I thought you should be, but as I always needed you to be. So tonight, or tomorrow, or whenever you feel ready, start the conversation. Don't let decades go by thinking you're fine when you could be incredible. Because you deserve passion, you deserve joy, and you deserve the freedom to want what you actually want. And if this conversation stirs something in you, if you felt seen, challenged, or just plain curious, I want you to stay connected with me. So subscribe to my YouTube channel at Hearts Wine from Hearts Distractions on YouTube for exclusive episodes and content. Visit my website at aliciasdistractions.com for more resources and updates. And don't forget to grab a copy of my poetry book, Distractions of the Heart, on Amazon. There's more in there to inspire your own reflections on love, intimacy, and connection, I promise you. And of course, I want you to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for daily relationship insights, behind the scenes, and yes, some of those spicy, controversial topics we don't always get to here. Or we will at some point, right? So, until next time, let's get back to the heart and maybe under the covers. Raise those wine glasses and say what? Cheers.